Hello, everyone. It is November 7th at 6:30. I'm calling to order the Middleton School Committee meeting. This message is recorded. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and we will move right into the agenda of approving the minutes from the previous meeting, which was on October 2nd.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for the October 2nd meeting.
I will second that.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor of approving minutes from October 2nd, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Okay. Welcome. Hello.
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 Good evening, everybody. Hey, Peggy. How are you? Good. Jackie, Joe, Dave, Michelle. Good evening, everybody. A couple of updates to share with the committee. Fuller Meadow driveway. As you may recall from previous meetings, we've talked about traffic and some of the challenges that we have on this site. And we've been working closely with Town Hall. And we reached out to Danisco Design. Danisco actually was the company that, the architectural firm that designed and helped build Howe Manning Elementary School. And they've done some work here at Fuller Meadow over the years, so they have really good knowledge of both of our buildings. And so we asked Ken Danisco from Danisco Design, he's the founder of the company, to come down and do a walkthrough. He met with Jen, myself, Steve Greenberg, Steve Clifford, and Justin, the town administrator. And basically the goal at that meeting was to show the site to Ken and to kind of take him all throughout the site, walk through, and ended up being a 2.5-hour visit from Ken here on site. Jen and I were there for maybe 45 minutes of it, and then Steve Greenberg as well, and then Steve Clifford spent the rest of the time with him. And the goal really is like short-term and long-term solutions for this site, capital planning for this site, civil site project work for this site. And so he took a ton of notes, took a lot of, I think, mental pictures for sure. He has all the overhead maps and property lines, and we're still, waiting for some final assessments from him in terms of what an initial report would look like. We said to him at that meeting that it would really be incumbent upon him to see it in action, like to see pickup and dismissal from on the campus, and then to see pickup and dismissal from off the campus, and that has started.
Yesterday, we did on campus in the morning and the afternoon, and I met with Ken afterwards, and then tomorrow he's coming to sit across the street in the morning and in the afternoon, and then he's coming in the building, and he's going to meet with me to debrief after.
Great. Because it's important. It's one thing to see it from the front door of Fuller Meadow. It's another thing to sit in like the Richardson's parking lot and see the traffic back up and where it builds and all of those things. So he will put together really something for us to chew on as a committee. Is it something? And I think the town is very interested in partnering with us on this and trying to put some real short-term fixes in while we plan for a longer-term fix down the road. I think one of the things we had talked about at one of our meetings is we're waiting to see where the property line lands, but as you come down the Fuller Meadow driveway, if we have room to the right, can we make 2 lanes coming in so we can take the queuing traffic off of 114 and, have it kind of build towards the back of where the library is and then circle back up, and that would take a lot of the cars off 114. So this will be an ongoing endeavor throughout the course of this school year for sure, in terms of the planning, the design, what it might all look like, what a warrant article could potentially look like as we try to navigate this as well. But I appreciate the partnership with the town on this. Justin has been with us every step of the way and is very interested in, I think, seeing this, come to some sort of a resolution, both short-term and long-term. Because again, it's the only campus, if you heard me say, of the 6 that has one road in and one road out. All the other campuses, we have multiple egress and access points on campus. So more to come on that.
Couple questions.
Yeah.
The folks at Danisco, do we have them on like a retainer or?
Yeah, so they are on, I think, Steve, they're going to bill us. I think we're thinking it's going to be under 10.
Yeah.
And I think, we use operating budget for now, knowing that it's early enough in the school year.
Okay.
And then navigate that as we move further into the spring. So if we
Okay.
have to move budget line items around, or if we have to take an offset from a revolving account, it could be like a building rental, maybe use some of the funding from that to help pay for it. So, but we're going to go through the operating account now, and the initial assessment, that'll be around under $10,000
Okay.
for the design.
And now we are still saving money or not paying out as much money on the buses as we had normally thought we would because we don't have as many, correct, still?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
So,
Yeah, there's a savings there.
okay.
And that's when we say it's early enough in the school year that you have comings and goings, like did they
Yeah.
not fill a position until October 1st? There's 30 days of salary that was saved. And so this is the time of year when it's early enough in the year that we can navigate these things. As you get into later parts of the year, that gets to be much more difficult because money gets, accounted and appointed to the different line items at a quicker pace for sure,
Right.
once we get into the spring.
Yeah.
Scott, I do have a question. So if you said we're partnering up with the town, so if there are capital improvements, that comes out of both budgets or the city?
Yeah, it would, the way it would possibly work, Dave, would be a warrant article.
Okay.
And we would seek a warrant article. We would partner with the town on getting that warrant article at town meeting. So to give you for example, there's been a lot of talk in Boxford around how do we, like we have some boilers there that are 60 years old, and the conversation is, well, do we just take out a gas boiler and put a new gas boiler in, or do we look at something that might be a little more sustainable and green, and because this is like a 30-year kind of a project. Sure. And so the town agreed with the school department, like, hey, let's hold hands on a warrant article. We asked for $75,000 at town meeting to have a company come in and do a complete assessment of how much is it going to cost to take out the old boilers, and just put new gas-fired ones in? How much is it going to cost to do heat pumps with, like the, what do you call it, ductless units?
Yep.
Something like that. How much would it cost to do a, Steve, what's the other one called in the ground?
Geothermal.
Geothermal. Thanks, Dave, yeah. Which is crazy expensive,
Yeah.
right? But like, they're gonna go into it eyes wide open. Hey, you wanna do geothermal, it's gonna be X.
Yeah.
And now you work on that. So we would work with Select Board FinCom, Justin's office, and say, all right, short-term fix might be around X. Can we seek a warrant article funding? So it wouldn't necessarily come out of the school budget,
Okay,
but it would be additional town funds raised to help support that cause
understood.
through a capital process. Yeah. Any other questions on that? All right.
I'm good.
XR Terra, you'll see a little Google slide sheet in there. It's just a little, it's really their webpage, the front page of their webpage. And so you've heard us talk about, we always talk about or we have been talking lately about the readiness gap, how to, prepare our kids for the future economy and what that will look like. And you've heard me talk a lot about artificial intelligence and virtual reality and augmented reality and so on and so forth. So we're starting a partnership with XR Terra. It's an organization that the person who leads that organization is someone I've been familiar with for a very long time. They're very invested in public education. And so using some funding from our tech lines, Julie Kelly and Steve Greenberg, we're going to invest very lightly in some virtual reality goggles, some VR goggles. We're looking to get 10 for each town, 10 in Boxford, 10 in Middleton, 10 in Topsfield. And using our tech supply and material accounts, it's about $3,000 or so to get 10 sets of these VR goggles and start to spin up some pilots and things that we might be able to see how this could impact public education as we move forward. Are there trainings that we can do with staff? Are there activities that we can engage with our upper elementary kids. I think for us, certainly we'll be starting with staff with this, where it's kind of like a whole new world. This VR world, virtual reality world, and augmented reality world. And XR Terra will be our partner in this as we navigate this process. So we're going to just try this out. As I said, we're always trying to think of like the R&D component of the work that we do. What's the research and the development? And what I'm really excited about is there's about 10 school districts. We're one of the 10 that are sort of forming a coalition around this across the state and trying to be on the front end of this. I've often said that I feel like over the course of my career, the private sector is always the front car of the train, and public ed is usually like the 20th car on the train. And by the time the 20th car gets to where the first car was already at, a lot of time has passed, right? How do we make public ed the second car on the train? So we're kind of moving in tandem, particularly as we think about, you've heard me talk about how quickly all this is moving, and 10 years from now, I think public ed will look vastly different. And, oh, by the way, 10 years from now, our first graders are in 11th grade, still in this thing called public ed, right? So there's about 10 communities that are coming together. Masco is going to be part of this. I've talked with Mike. I think it's great if we can kind of do a K-12 hands-held endeavor on this in terms of just spinning up some pilots, trying some different things as it relates to trainings for staff, maybe as it relates to the pillars that we have in terms of our overall goals and social emotional well-being and inclusionary practices and innovative teaching practices. So not a lot to report as of yet, other than we're excited to be part of this small coalition and excited to be engaged in these conversations. Sometimes we get kind of caught up on, a lot of the minutia things that occur in the district, and to be able to start thinking about this stuff and what the impact could be on public ed is pretty exciting. So there'll be a lot more to come on this for sure. And we'll be looking for some teachers who the teachers know I often think of all of us as, and you can think of like any part of your life like this. Sometimes you might be a beach sitter, like kind of like watch it all happen. Sometimes you might be a toe dipper, and then sometimes you might be a dock jumper on things, right? And so with stuff like this, I know across the 3 towns, we have people who are ready to sort of quote unquote jump off the dock and try some of these exciting things and see what the impact may be on teaching and learning as we move forward. So
Have you tried one before?
I have, actually. It's funny you should say that, Michelle. I just got a pair because I'm like, if we're going to try this at school, I need to make sure I know what the heck all this stuff means. It's wild.
Yeah.
Wild. In a good way. Do you know what I mean? Like, I put them on and I downloaded Supernatural, which is a training, it's a fitness workout program. It's like the coach is literally right there. Like, I'm talking, and it's not a Nintendo Wii cartoony thing. Remember Nintendo Wii? It was all cartoony and nobody had, it was like half of a body and they just sort of floated in air. This is like looking at Jen, who could be the coach potentially, and they're talking to you, and it is so immersive. It's unbelievable. You've tried it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I need to spend more time with it, but I'm like, I have to get a pair personally if I'm going to start to talk about these things. I want to make sure I have some knowledge of it, but if you've never tried it, I would highly recommend trying it. They're very accessible. I mean, it's, for the amount of technology, and when you think what you would pay for an iPad or a cell phone, it's about $300. It's a lot of money. And when you think of like a computer years ago was $2,000, right? So these will continue to come down. Apple's making a version that, if you get a chance to look at it, they're called the ProVision. We looked at it this summer as a team, and we were talking about the future of public ed and the work that we have to do. And if you check out the Apple ProVision one, it's literally, when you see your home screen on your phone, it looks like that, all the apps. When you put these goggles on, all the apps are, right here in space in front of you, and you control it all with your eyes, and it's mind-blowing, right? And so my head immediately goes to, like, what's the impact on kids? Like, what will teaching and learning look like, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road? I think I've said to you guys before, like, I don't know, 2050, will kids get on a bus and drive to a brick building? I don't know, maybe not, right? What will it look like? So, yeah.
Do you envision, like, the kids, like, looking at different parts of the world?
Sure.
About, like, the Grand Canyon, or
Sure.
like
Going to-
different monuments, or
Absolutely.
an art museum,
Yep.
or
There's history connections, there's social studies connections, there's science connections. I mean, I've seen things now, like, instead of like in 8th grade or whatever grade it was when you dissect the frog, well, now you can just do it sort of virtually, right? You don't have the formaldehyde smell or whatever the case may be, right? So I think the possibilities are literally endless. It's very early stage.
Scott, if I could jump in.
It's exciting that we're one of part of 10 communities doing this.
So, being able to take trips, and this is part of the I'll jump ahead a little bit in the agenda, the Patagonia information, but part of what Julie Klipfeld was looking at is being able to, and I think this is part of what National Geographic was trying to bringing together their photographers, teachers, scientists, to try and put together those kinds of things. And one of the things she was hoping to learn there was like that 360-degree photography, to be able to bring
Yes.
it back, and the kids can then actually experience Patagonia in 4D, really, almost, right, versus instead of 3D, as opposed to just on the
Yes.
flat screen, but really be immersed in the whole thing. So I think that's part of that applicability of where it's going.
One of the things I tried when and I need to spend much more time with them, but it was just that, Jeff. It allowed you, it was like a group that was going scuba diving. And so I put the goggles on, and whoever had the 360-degree camera, they would step off the boat into the raft, but now like you're in the raft, and you look around you, and it's all, you see everything. And then the raft took off, and then, you go into the water, and it literally feels like you're there.
Yeah.
And so to be able to experience things in that way, I mean, I just see so many connections for, I think you develop partnerships across the country with different schools. I think it's going to get to a point where, like this meeting, we could do it Zoom, or you could do it virtually, right?
I'll put on a headset.
You put on your headset, and like I see you right here, like you're literally right next
Yeah,
to me.
that's crazy.
So I'm learning a ton about it. I look forward to learning more about it. It's exciting stuff, and it fits in with what we've talked about, in that we have to think about what's the future of education hold for our kids. How can we support them as a committee and as a community, and the work that we're doing. And I get excited when I talk about it, and my colleagues look at me like they have no idea what I'm talking about, which makes me excited, because I'm like, okay, we're talking about good stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's the future of education, for sure.
I don't know how this program works, but on the device that we have, when the kids are using it, I can like monitor
Yeah.
what they're seeing.
Yes.
So once we do get them up and running or whatever, I'd like to, if you guys can do like a screen record
Yeah,
or something,
sure.
so
Yeah.
that we can.
And I think for sure we'll start with staff. Like that's going to be our sort of first out of the gate,
Yeah.
to kind of like, because it's new for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But as we continue to progress, we'll keep you up to date. If you get a chance, honestly, it's a 9-minute video, the Apple Pro Vision. It'll blow your mind, absolutely blow your mind, how that could impact the work that we do. I mean, it makes me think too, if Apple's coming out with something, they're not investing in that if they don't think there's going to be a massive market share, right? So the Oculus ones and Meta and all that, like it's gaming and stuff like that, but I feel like Apple is very much a school-based product. You think of the iPads and all the other things over the years. So if they're putting out a unit, yeah, that there's going to be a market share for that in the future for sure. So anyway, exciting stuff and more to come.
When do we get those?
They're ordered, POs are cut. Julie and Steve, out of the tech budget, allocated the money from that. So, I don't know, Steve, probably a couple of weeks they'll come in? Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and if you get a chance to try them on, it sounds like Michelle is up here if you want to borrow it. Yeah. And then Brigadoon Neighborhood Parking Policy, again, this has been a partnership with the town in the sense of, as you may recall, we've sent out a couple of letters over the course of since the start of the school year. We know traffic's always tight at Fuller. We know that traffic's tight at Hal Manning. We have kids who live in the Brigadoon neighborhood who are walkers. They leave Brigadoon and walk to the back there. We've had some occasions where families have been using that fairly regularly as non-Brigadoon residents, using that as a way to shorten, I think, the wait times, and we do totally respect and understand that the wait times are, long with, lack of drivers and long parent pickup lines and so on and so forth. So we have sent some communications from, first it was Jen and I, and then we had a communication, it was Jen, Jeff, myself, the police chief, and Justin, the town administrator, just asking people to, be cognizant of the fact that that is a neighborhood and people live back there, and when there's a lot of traffic back there and kids moving about and walking, it can create an unsafe circumstance. So I think the town has been fielding some feedback on this as well. The select board has been fielding some feedback on it also. I've been in regular communication with some of the folks who live down in that neighborhood also, just hearing the different challenges that it has represented. And so my understanding is that the select board is putting a policy in place, and we'll be sending out, just waiting for Justin for some final details, but I'll read to you sort of a draft of what a communication home would look like. Dear Fuller Meadow and Hal Manning families and staff, The purpose of this email is to provide you with information about a new Brigadoon neighborhood parking policy adopted by the Select Board. Please be advised that in the coming weeks, signage will be posted in 3 locations: Meadow Drive at South Main, Edgewood and Fuller, and along the pedestrian walkway leading to Fuller Meadows School, I think it's out that way, from Edgewood Road. The signage will read as follows: Brigadoon resident, parking standing only, school days 8 to 9, and then 2 to 4, placard required. Placards for Brigadoon residents may be requested at no cost at the town clerk's office and will expire upon the end of the school year. Placards will be numbered and registered to specific households. Middleton PD will monitor the rollout. Should a vehicle not have a placard displayed, the license plate will be run. Should the vehicle be registered to a household outside of Brigadoon neighborhood, the vehicle will be issued a $15 parking violation. This can be appealed at the town's clerk's office. And so the select board are just trying to put a policy in place that's, because the folks that live back there, they actually don't have access to buses, and it's a walking sort of routine only. And so that, waiting to hear back from Justin as to when the signage will go up, but this is a communication that will go out from the schools once we get the green light from the town. But just wanted to make you aware that that's sort of the next step in that process that the town is taking.
Okay.
And that's it from me.
All right. Moving on to the report from the Assistant Superintendent.
All right, good evening, everyone. What's included in the drive is the November financial report. There is really not anything exciting to report at this time. Everything's going along from a budgetary, financial perspective as let's say, expected. So I will stop talking and answer any questions the committee may have.
How are things coming along for the next school year?
They're coming along. So we're just getting ready. Really, it's the big thing, of course, will be pulling salaries together. So notices will go out to the staff, here's where you are, where do you plan to be next year? So that's the biggest cost, area of the budget is salaries. So that assembly will happen between the month of November and December. And the rest of it, we'll be meeting with all the department heads and the building principals to go over their needs, their wants, and build budgets from there. So we are well underway.
Okay. I don't have any further questions.
All right, well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, report from the principals.
So I'm going to go off the top of my head. I wrote down all my notes, which are now currently sitting on my desk down the street. So I'll try and remember everything that I had written down. But parent-teacher conferences wrapped up not last week, the week before. This is the first time we've done them, as you know, this early in the year, so a little bit newer format. I think it went very well. They were well attended. 15 minutes is not a tremendous amount of time to get to talk about your child, but I think it's a good starting point, and I would encourage parents, if you still have questions or want to continue the conversation, to reach out to the teachers to do that. It doesn't have to wait until the next round of conferences, but I will tell you 15 minutes is not bad in this day and age. I just signed up for my kids' conference, and we signed up for 5-minute conferences at their school. So talk about not having a lot of time to, it's basically just spitting out, they're doing this, and this, and next. So while 15 minutes is not great, I think it's better than a lot of places are getting. Recently, the MassQ conference, which is the Massachusetts Computer Using Educators, just held their fall conference down at Gillette Stadium a couple weeks ago, 2-day conference. I got to spend a little time with Mr. Greenberg over there at Gillette Stadium, which is awesome because it all takes place in the luxury suites at Gillette Stadium. So all of the different sessions that you can sign up for take place in different sessions, in different luxury boxes, which is quite the view. I paid attention a lot, but you could see the fields right outside. And I got yelled at by security once because the Patriots practice on the back fields, and you can walk back and forth between the two and see them. Security keeps you moving, and I tried to be slick and take a picture for my brother, and I got yelled at, but I made it out safely. But we had some of our 5th graders were there and presented. They led one session along with Barbara Deely and Katie Nasser. It was a kind of a combination project between those two classes of an interactive mural where using the technology is a little bit beyond me and not even as high as artificial intelligence, but basically it's electrified paint that they can use. So there's a circuit and people can touch it and they hear the kids. And so basically they did it based off of their learning profiles, and you could touch it and it speaks to the kids. So they were there to present about that. So that was very, very exciting. And they were all happy to be in luxury suites as well. We currently have a clothing drive going on. One of our fifth graders, Gia, came to me a couple weeks ago and asked if we could host a clothing drive for, it's through an organization called Katie's Closet, which then takes those clothes and in communities in Massachusetts, they go into schools and give out the clothes to the kids in those schools that are a little more underserved. So that will go on until November 26th. We sent home a flyer with that. It was in the newsletter. It was on Howie's Facebook page. We'll resend it again in the newsletter each of the weeks going forward. But we've had a pretty good response so far. We've filled, there's a box at the front door, a box at the back door. We've filled both of the boxes twice so far. We're hoping to continue to fill them. Gia's mom comes and picks them up when the boxes are full and brings them to her house, and they'll take care of donating from there. So it is a great time of year as you switch over from summer clothes into fall and winter clothes to start going through the drawers and the closets and starting to get rid of some of the things that no longer fit. A good place to drop them off. So the Patagonia, Julie Klipfel is back. She came back to school. She got back to the United States Thursday afternoon. She was back in her classroom Friday morning.
Oh, wow.
I think it was a little disorienting to be at the tip of South America one day and 48 hours later being in your classroom in Middleton. So, but she is back. She had a great trip. I think we're going to try and get her back here for the December or January school committee meeting to kind of present her whole thing. I think you will find it fascinating, but you can follow her on her Instagram page. Some incredible pictures of glaciers, a cave that has had woolly mammoth, saber-toothed tiger. I'm sorry, I made that up, the woolly mammoth. Saber-toothed tiger remains were found in this cave that she was in. And there's a really nice picture of a really large, I guess it's not an Alaskan king crab because it's on the other side of the earth, but it's a king crab, which looks delicious. And then there's a video of them navigating the, and I'll get this wrong, the Kirke Narrows. It's a fast-paced video, so it's they had to send boats ahead to make sure that they could actually get past. It's so narrow, and the water has to be the perfect height. And apparently Ferdinand Magellan navigated the same region. It took his expedition most of the month of November in 1520 to make it through. They made it through in a couple hours.
Wow.
So I encourage you to go look at that, and Julie will be here hopefully in December to really present and show a whole bunch about what she learned and what she's bringing back to the classroom, which is quite a bit. I want to give a shout out to Mrs. Klipfel. So this was a family affair. So while Julie was missed almost 2 full weeks, her mother, who was recently retired from Topsfield, substituted in her class for those 2 weeks. She volunteers regularly, so the kids already knew her, so they the only adjustment they really needed to make was it's Mrs. Klipfel instead of Miss Klipfel. But so that was really appreciated, particularly in this time of finding subs and being able to have one consistent person and a high quality teacher as well in there was great. So
That's very exciting.
Yeah.
that's all I got.
Did she do the polar plunge? Did you hear?
I don't know about the polar plunge. She'll have
Yeah.
to tell you on that one, but Yeah, I would not have.
And she stayed connected to the class during
She
that
was
time?
connected to the class. The internet connection was intermittent, so, but she was connecting with the class. She was sending emails and pictures, and they had a map on the, in the hallway. There was a map of where she was, and there was pictures there. She even brought a cardboard cutout of Howie. So Howie spent a little, kind of like Flat Stanley.
Yeah.
Spent a little time in Patagonia as well, so.
That's cool.
Very exciting.
Okay.
Yep. So I would agree with Jeff that the conferences went really well this year. I think, curriculum night was great for families to learn a lot about what's happening in the classroom, but then to have conferences so early in the year, especially for, the youngest students, I think the parents felt very connected to the classrooms and to their teachers and really could find out how the children are settling in, social, emotionally, with their peer groups, the routines, behavior, and then the academic piece as well. So I just heard a lot of positive feedback from parents and the teachers as well, so I think that was great. We finished all of our data meetings. We've settled in. We instituted one time a month where each grade level will have a collaborative meeting where we will look at the data, sort of progress monitoring our students. We had one this morning on second grade. Basically, we go through and we track the students that are receiving some sort of an intervention, and we're kind of looking at their scores, and if things are going in the right, we just say, stay the course, stay the course. If not, we have a conversation about what might need to be adjusted. So we'll have probably about 3 of those in this period, and then before we have our next round of collection of data and full-day meetings. So that's new this year, and I think it seems like it's being really well received. We had our first school council meeting yesterday, started looking at the school improvement plan and sort of where we're at with that and beginning conversations around budget. We have, I know I mentioned last year, we've put in an all-school meeting where the students all come and the whole school community inside get together, and we talk about the core values of the schools. So this first one is really where you give an overview. You think of 5, 6, 7-year-olds. The 5-year-olds don't even know what we're talking about, so we're trying to introduce them to the core values and trying to make them be more interactive where students are involved. So we were able to do that with some second graders this time, and it was well received, and some of the staff are going to start taking this over so that they can have more responsibility. The fun run, we appreciated how it went this year. They took some feedback in terms of ways they could sort of modify a little bit to make it maybe a little more user-friendly at the school side. It went really well. The group that was here, they were very respectful of us and our students and how to get the kids fired up. And they made $46,913 for the Middleton public schools. That's actually what we walked off with.
That's
So
awesome.
it's pretty tremendous for a week, really is. So my hat's off to all the folks involved because we appreciated what they did and how well we worked together. And last thing, the Fuller Meadow safety meetings are underway. We plan on scheduling an Alice drill after school at some point this year. I know that Town Meeting, I believe, had one. I unfortunately was sick when you had the whole town safety meeting, but so we're moving forward in that direction so we all can be sort of ready to go. We're on the same page, and I'm excited for that collaboration. And that is it, unless you have any questions.
I did have one question. Were you able to hire the person that we voted on for last meeting?
Yes.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
How was it working out?
Great.
Good? Okay.
It was a really good situation, so thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Anything else? Okay.
Right.
All right, new business.
Gifts and grants in the drive, you'll see, this is an annual gift from Ray Gooley Electric, and we appreciate this for sure. And so, as we've talked about in the past, we always need to have school committee accept any gifts and grants. This was a $500 gift to the town of Middleton Hal Manning Science Fund. Jeff, this is an annual
Yes.
endeavor.
Yep. Ray comes and does an assembly for each grade level, one day, each, all 4 of the days of the week, and then gives us a $500 check at the end of it,
Very kind.
which we use for our science. What exactly at this point we're going to spend this $500 on remains to be seen, but it will be science related.
Great. So we would be seeking a motion from the committee to accept the gift of $500 with a thank you to Ray Gooley.
I'll make that motion.
Second that motion.
Okay, all in favor of accepting the 500 donation from Ray Gooley, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Great, thank you, Ray.
Thank you, Ray, indeed. A couple of policy subcommittee updates. So Dave is your policy subcommittee rep, and Stephanie Bonapane in Boxford and Candace Snyder in Topsfield. And so the policy subcommittee, as you guys may recall, from those that have been on the committee a while, anytime we get updates and changes from MASC, we bring them to the policy subcommittee to review, so we're not having to spend a lot of school committee time on that. That's the reason for that subcommittee. They do the heavy lifting, and then we bring them to the school committee, and we do a brief overview, and the understanding is that the subcommittee has already vetted these things, and so we seek, approval at the school committee level. Back in March, they put out, MASC is the they in this scenario, they put out updates on 22 pages of policies, it seems, like after Antoinette and I went through them all. About 50 of them were minor changes. I think I can't remember if I said this last time or not. I don't think I did, because it would have been after our meeting. And so the subcommittee met, and there were about 50 policies where it was like, you're just changing the word parent to parent guardian, or this is going to be capitalized, you need a period here, a comma here. There was nothing substantial. And when I presented it to the subcommittee, I said, this could be a potential large use of school committee time for things that are minor that you guys can, in my opinion, approve. And the policy subcommittee agreed, and, we're making those changes. I mean, like, literally on this one policy, the change would be bullet number 3, remove towns, public schools, and change it to the word school district. And there's nothing substantive about that. So I went through all 50 of those of the policy sub. The whole subcommittee agreed that we can make those changes. And then we met today, and we'll bring these to the December meeting to talk about policies that MASC is recommending be removed, that they're captured in other policies in the policy book, and so we navigated that, and I'll get into that further detail in December. But at the meeting where we looked at the 50, where it was just add a period here or a semicolon there, Michelle had come to talk about some ideas that she had had as chair of the Middleton School Committee on some updates to the public comment policy. So if you go into the drive, you'll see policy BEDH, and I will have Michelle speak to these, where these were some ideas she brought to the policy subcommittee. Shared this in Topsfield last Thursday. We have Middleton tonight, we have Boxford tomorrow night, so we're in the sort of sharing it out to the committees with the potential to look to vote on this in December, I think is the thinking, right, Michelle?
Yeah, yep.
If you want to walk the committee through that?
Yeah, so this was basically how I came up with these ideas were from my experience thus far being on the committee. And if you look at the policy that's in the drive right now, anything that is red would be adding to our current policy. So I guess I can just start from the first bullet point, number 1. It is our current policy that at the start of every meeting, every individuals will need to sign up for public comment, and that is in Middleton and through the Tri-Town. It's something that we haven't been doing, but I feel that it's something that we should be doing. So I think that moving forward, regardless of if these changes are voted on, we should be practicing the policy that we have in place. But adding in to that paragraph, I would, in red, it says, once the meeting is called to order, the sign-up window ends. The order of the comments will go in first come, first serve on the sign-up list. And then it continues on. The public comment segment shall not exceed 15 minutes. The presiding chair may permit extension to this time limit in extenuating circumstances. All speakers are encouraged to present their remarks in a respectful manner. So basically, I'm just saying that the sign-up window ends at whenever the meeting is called to order. In the second section, this is for people listening. This is what is currently in the policy. Speakers shall be allowed 3 minutes to present the material and must begin their comments by stating their name, city, and town. This would be the new part. If there are more than 5 people signed up, the time limit will drop to 2 minutes or 1 minute, depending on how many people are on the list. No one will be denied the opportunity to submit their public comment, whether verbally or in writing. The adjusted time limit per comment will be to the chair's discretion. And then the last sentence is staying the same in the current policy. The presiding chair will permit extension to the time limit in extenuating circumstances. Are there any questions or discussion before I move on?
I would just say one thing in terms of these time limits. If it's a topic that's going to be more difficult, or if there's more extenuating circumstances, there can always be like a special meeting for, like if there's a topic that we think there's going to be a lot of people coming to.
Yeah, and I think we would know that beforehand,
Yeah. Okay.
you know. Have we ever had a meeting like that previously?
No, no,
No?
but I think we
Okay.
have, I'll look, Dave, I think we do have policy on it.
Yeah.
So we can bring that up at the policy sub for sure.
Paragraph 3 stays the same. Topics for discussion shall be limited to those items within the school committee's scope of authority. The authority to the school committee primarily concerns the review and approval of the budget to the district's public schools, the performance of the superintendent, and the educational goals and policies of the district's public schools. Comments and complaints regarding school personnel, apart from the superintendent, or students, are generally prohibited unless those comments and complaints concern matter within the scope of the school committee authority.
4 was an MASC recommendation.
Okay.
The cross out there.
Yep. 4 says the chair of the meeting, after warning, reserves the right to terminate speech which is not constitutionally protected because it constitutes true threats and are likely to provoke a violent reaction and cause a breach of the peace, or incitement to imminent lawless conduct. And then you'll see crossed out there, it says, or contains obscenities. And I think that's crossed out just because it's kind of reiterated beforehand. And then in section 5, this is currently in the policy, written comments longer than 3 minutes may be presented to the presiding chair before or after the meeting. If anyone's comment is cut off due to the time limit, their full comment, if provided, will be sent to all committee members and posted with the meeting minutes. So that part stating that the full comment being sent to all committee members and posted with the meeting minutes would be the new section. All remarks will be addressed through the chair of the meeting. Comments made during the public comment portion of the meeting do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of the Boxford, Middleton, or Topsfield school committees. And then 6, sign-up instructions will be provided for those who wish to participate in public comment.
Which seems a little redundant,
Yeah.
you know.
So I don't necessarily want to vote on this tonight. I'd like, there can obviously be some discussion, any questions if you think we should add anything to it. But sometimes when we're making changes like these, my ideas sometimes come to me after the meeting. So I'd kind of like to digest, all of you to digest this a little bit, and then we could maybe make a more educated vote at the December meeting. But one thing Scott did mention to me is if we happen to have a school committee meeting on Zoom, like how would we handle like the public comment sign up there? And I think that you had.
Yeah, Topsfield, when we brought up at Topsfield last week, they thought the additions that Michelle had presented to the subcommittee were doable as a full committee. They didn't want to vote on it either. They wanted to just take the time between now and December to digest it. But the question came up, right, if there was a Zoom meeting, you know, we're saying a sign-up sheet, and sign-ups would close when the meeting starts, and so the thinking there was like have the chat feature open, and people could sign up in order in the chat feature, and then when the chair said, I now call this meeting to order, the chat feature would be shut off, and then we would have a list of names. So that could be how we could handle that. I mean, that seems like, hopefully, you know, a rare event that we're
Yeah.
not engaging in that anymore, but that was the one thing that came up in Topsfield.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, any concerns or,
I have a question on
Yeah.
on this policy, because I'm new to the school committee, so is it all policy changes have to go through all three towns to be enforceable on Middleton's level? So they're voted by Topsfield? I'm
No,
confused
so,
with that, so.
if you didn't like this and were like, no, Michelle, I don't want any of these changes, I just want to keep the policy the same, and the rest of the committee felt the same way, they could be no. But Boxford and Topsfield could say, yes, we like it. No,
So is there something that on future policies, they have to be accepted on all three towns to be implemented in Middleton? Is that?
So in the broader sense of that question, Joe, we have a tri-town school union policy book. So it used to be that there was a Middleton policy book, a Topsfield policy book, and a Boxford policy book. And, a good chunk of them were the same, and then there were, some unique differences among the three towns. And it was the will of the committees going back probably 2018 or so to increase efficiency and productivity, to have a tri-town school union policy book. And so what we have tried to do over the years is to have the policies be similar across the three towns for kind of obvious reasons, right, in terms of just trying to maintain a degree of efficiency and productivity. At the end of the day, I think MASC, and we can check for them for guidance, that's the Mass Association of School Committees, I think what they would say ultimately is that if there were some changes between towns, I think that would be acceptable, because at the end of the day, we are three separate school districts. We are the tri-town school union with one governing body. But we would not want to try to head back in that direction of three separate policy books, because it's the same reason why, like the teacher contracts, right? The teacher contracts are, in 2016, were extraordinarily different. And then, a lot of time, effort, and energy would be spent when something came up. You'd be looking through, well, how does Middleton do it? How does Boxford do it? How does Topsfield do it? The school calendar is another great example of that. Remember when I first started in 16, Middleton had a school calendar that was different from Topsfield and Boxford. From a professional development perspective, trying to pull teachers, the days didn't line up. The first day of school was different in all three towns. The last day of school was all different in all three towns. So we have tried to, over the years, function in a way that increases those two words again, efficiency and productivity, and the policies certainly fall in line with that. But I think at the end of the day, if there was some differences among the three towns, it would be accepted.
My concern is, again, being new to the school committee, there's only really three things that we do, and policy is 1/3 of that.
Yeah.
And it just seems like we're going to follow the other two towns in agreement when, if there's an important policy that we feel as a committee should be put through. You're saying that there won't be a problem if we decide to put through a policy that the other two towns disagree with.
Yeah, I'm saying I'd like to double check that with MASC.
Okay.
Because they're the body that is sort of the administration of all of these policies. They're the group that, all these policies reside on the MASC website.
Okay.
And when you click on our policies, it doesn't say like Boxford policies, Middleton policies, Topsfield policies. It says Tri-Town School Union Policy Book. So it's certainly something I can check, and we can talk about as a policy subcommittee for sure.
Okay.
My gut feeling, right, and this is, I couch it as a gut feeling because I would want to check it before saying to you like affirmatively yes or no. My gut feeling is that, yeah, there probably could be some differences between the three towns, because at the end of the day, we are still three different towns, right? My advice as a superintendent would be, let's just pretend for a minute that the three towns decided they wanted all, I don't even know how many policies are, probably 300, all 300 policies to be different among all three towns. I would strongly advise against that as a superintendent in terms of trying to administer the school district and govern the school district. We would be spending a great part of our time knee-deep in a policy book trying to figure out, oh, this teacher's from Boxford, or this situation is a Boxford situation, and so on and so forth. So, and I know you're not suggesting that. I'm just saying, like, from a, again, efficiency and productivity perspective. But I'll make a note, and we can certainly get clarity on that for sure.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Good. Any other thoughts on this?
I think the extra language or the additional language is helpful just to clarify some things, and I think it does make sense to go back to the sign-up. Just, then everybody knows whose turn it is and when, and
Yeah.
hopefully that takes some pressure off you
Yeah.
or the chair as well.
I mean, I can tell you as chair, if I'm sitting here and I have like a huge list and I have to figure out, how many minutes
Yeah.
per person, I'm gonna need some kind of leeway.
Yeah.
I don't like cutting people off, I don't like interrupting people. But I understand why in this case it is important, so.
I would ask, like the 1 minute to speak, I guess it allows everybody the opportunity to speak, but
Yeah.
I feel like you don't get much out
I
in
know,
a minute.
I know.
But it does allow everybody the opportunity to maybe make their thoughts very concise and at least have the opportunity.
Yeah, or if they think that there's going to be a lot of people at public comment, maybe they can whittle it
written,
down to 1 minute and then present a full
Written,
written comment
Yeah.
in the minutes.
I was just gonna say that a successful practice I've seen is, don't read your comment, give us the 1 minute overview, and then, here you go, and then we give copies to the entire committee to have. And then it would be part of the minutes, too.
How would we encourage the public to do that? It wouldn't be part of the policy necessarily to say that, right? But how would we encourage the public to say,
In the meeting, you would do that.
In the meeting?
Yeah, like if you had like 10 people, Dave, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
And Michelle had to say, like, okay, everybody, look at, we've got this much, we're gonna allot 20 minutes until it's supposed to
as far
15.
as having them prepared, like have a document prepared, right? Because a lot of people come in without a prepared document, right? So maybe just through the course of us doing it, people will realize that's the process.
Yeah, and I think in the meeting, what we've said, I mean, we've had, during negotiations, during COVID, right, we've had lots of feedback and
Yep.
and communication. And, the way we operate is like, we'll literally, to keep track, we'll put a 3-minute timer on.
Yep.
And then we'll say to people, we have to stop you there, but please submit your full written comment so people can hear it. So people can either, the way we've done it in the past is, if you think you can summarize it in about 2 minutes' time, not reading it word for word, or read as much as you can in 2 minutes,
Yep.
that'll give us the gist, and then we'll accept the rest as a written,
Do you think there's a
statement.
way in advance of us, once we make the decision to adopt the policy, is there a way that we can get this out to the public to say, hey, listen, these are the changes to the public comment policy. We encourage you to come speak. We encourage you to write your comments down. That way you can present them in advance.
Sure,
I think would be helpful to the community.
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, when we post the agenda, we can put a link right to the
Right.
Yeah.
public comment
I think that's-
policy, right?
Yep.
Yeah, right there.
That would absolutely take care of that
Yeah.
situation.
A lot of people already are in the habit of like bringing their written policy. A lot of people do that, or their written comments.
Yeah.
Do you have I know we had one meeting that went off the rails. Do you have something in place if it goes off the rails, how legally you can shut someone down or remove somebody? Or
Well, I think
just so
that-
if that situation comes up, we're ready for it?
I think that as chair, myself and whoever is sitting in this seat in the future, I think that they really need to make sure that the comments are staying within the confines of what is in the school committee's scope. So if somebody comes in and is all upset about something that we really don't have control of, like, I don't know what that would be off the top of my head.
Brigadoon neighborhood policy.
Yes, like, we couldn't control that, I would maybe say, thank you for your comment, this is, we don't have control over, or if somebody comes in and complains about our principals, we don't hire the principals. You can only come here and complain about Scott. And lucky you. So I think we need to remind people of something like that. But if it is something within our scope and it does seem to be getting a little bit heated, I think we just need to remind people of number 4, where everything, it can't cause threats, provoke a violent reaction, cause a breach of the peace. I think we need to remind them of that paragraph in the policy. And then in the last sentence, in the first paragraph, it says, present their remarks in a respectful manner.
And during COVID, we would often read the policy, like I know Dave, you're saying, like, let's link it, which is a great idea on the agenda.
Yeah.
But also, before public comment, read the public comment policy. As a reminder to folks who are here tonight,
Yeah.
this is how this operates.
Yeah. I don't recall, like you said, Jackie, I don't recall how many people had their things prepared. I think there was times that people did have it, and I recall those times that people didn't have it. I just think that if we can kind of train people in a way, this is the best practice, and then just have them do it that way. That way, if they do have to cut them short, say, you know, we'll take care of it. Yeah.
Be able to do it from mine. We might be able to do it from mine, just so we can project up there.
So again, I would like to vote on this next month after we've had some time to think about it a little bit more. Yeah, we can continue this conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah?
I'll try to get set up for the MCAS.
Okay, is that it from the policy subcommittee?
Yes.
Okay.
Right, Dave?
Yes, no?
Yeah.
Say if it's, Jackie or Joe, if you guys have anything to contribute, like, between now and the time we vote. I don't know if you've already seen it, but you saw the policy, right?
Okay.
Are we gonna add the Zoom? Are we gonna add the Zoom?
Oh, yeah, I'll mention that. Scott, will you add in,
The Zoom?
if,
Zoom piece?
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. See if this works. Like, if you want to queue up while this is doing this. So for folks that's in the drive, if you look for the Middleton MCAS 2023, we'll see if this connects. If it doesn't connect, we'll go from the drive, but if we can get it up here, but if you want to start.
Sure.
And then we'll go from there. So if you guys have it on your computers for now, and then we'll see if we can get it up here.
So, as you know, we come every year and just kind of give you an update on where we are with MCAS scores and sort of those trends from year to year and the implications for curriculum and instruction. So, we always start off just talking about the student growth because that's a really important factor. So, student growth is only available in grades 4 through 6 because how student growth is calculated is it compares students to their own past performance. And since third grade is the very first year of MCAS, there's no past performance to be compared to. So growth rates start in fourth grade. And they go up through 10th. And what it's doing is it's comparing students to students who scored similarly to them in the past. How have they grown in comparison to those other students? So it's doing those like comparisons from year to year, from kind of cohort to cohort. And that is what we're looking at here. So typical growth for a student is between 40 and 60%. So if you look at the growth rates that we have here, all of our growth rates are in that typical range. A couple of them in fourth grade in particular are very close to being in the high range, and sixth grade math actually is high growth because it's over 60. So those are good results. Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome. That we were?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want me to drive?
No, I'll drive. That's fine. Just tell me when to go the next one.
Sure. Okay. So and anyway, this is good news in general, that we're seeing like really healthy growth scores across the Tri-Town. That's what we would hope to see in terms of the performance for our students. So going on to the next slide. Every year, just before the MCAS results are released, the state meets with administrators just to let them know what we're doing is sort of in context to the larger state. So they've been really interested to see how schools are kind of climbing out of the pandemic or recovering from the pandemic. So they keep giving us data that sort of shows us how what's happening now compares not only to last year, but how it compares to 2019, which is the last MCAS that occurred prior to the impact of the pandemic. So you notice in that column that says meeting or exceeding change for 2022. So these are statewide results. These are not Middleton's results. But overall, like grade 3 stayed exactly the same. And then it went up, this is for ELA, it went up like 2 points overall for fourth grade, 3 points overall for fifth grade. But if you look over into 2019, even though it went up, say, in fourth grade 2 points, it's still 12 percentage points below where it was in 2019. So there's still a lot of growth still to come in terms of helping students to recover statewide from the pandemic. So it's still a pretty significant hole that we're in from an ELA standpoint, and that makes sense given how developmental reading is, right, and having had those interruptions to students' education. So So when we move on to the next slide here, this is where we start to get into our results. So how you read this, the blue is the exceeding expectations, green is meeting expectations, the orange is partially meeting, and the red is not meeting expectations. So it shows a look back over the last 3 years. It is important to note that 21 data is a little suspect because that year we were just like coming out of the pandemic. We were still just coming out of hybrid learning, frankly. And the state decided to give an MCAS just to dipstick, but for every child, like a student only took half the test. So like you might have like half your class took questions 1 through 20 and the other half of your class took questions 21 through 40. So while it gave the state some sense of how students were doing overall, it wasn't particularly helpful from a curriculum standpoint because how do I know that if the whole class had taken this test that they all wouldn't have gotten that one right or they all wouldn't have gotten this one? So it didn't give great data from a standpoint of really giving us information about where we are from a curricular standpoint, but it's the data point that we have. And these charts that Jesse provides always have like that 3-year look back so you can see the results. But just kind of keep that in mind that 21 is a bit of an outlier because students didn't actually take a whole test that year. And then we're looking at 22, so that was our first year that we were back, completely in. Still a lot of absences due to illness, but we were kind of out of any sort of hybrid learning situation at that point, and we were kind of fully back in. And then 23, of course, we know that was another year of sort of being fully back in. So we are seeing some nice trends here for the ELA in grade 3. So we're at 63% overall. And up top, you'll see that it's 63% meeting and exceeding, because that's how the state always talks about it. It puts those two categories together. And then the state's meeting and exceeding was 44%. So it's a nice differential, 19 percentage point differential from the state, and overall upward performance for our students.
So these are last year's third graders.
Correct. Okay. Right. Yeah, it's always like the spring of the grade that we're seeing. Yeah, exactly. So those kids are now fourth graders. So then we go to fourth grade, and it's roughly the same as the previous year. The 21's a bit of an outlier, but again, remember that was not like a complete test, so the data's a little skewed. If we look at 22 and 23, they're not that different from each other, except we did take the not meeting expectations and we cut that number in half. So that was nice that we saw that sort of upward growth of how students were doing, and a little bit higher, and the exceeding expectations as well. Grade 5. So it's important to note, I think, is when you compare them to 22, it looks like they're really down. But that 22 cohort, they're the current so the 22, it was the 6th grade and 23. They're a really strong cohort. And sometimes that happens. You get a group of students that they're just really strong and they score very well from the beginning. So you'll see their scores throughout. They're kind of rising above the rest of the cohorts. And sometimes the opposite happens as well, that you get a lower cohort. But that 6th grade, I think it's a little bit more realistic to look at this and compare it to 21. It's a little bit more of a direct comparison. And if you look at them compared to themselves, so we have like 57% are meeting exceeding. If you go back to 4th grade, when they were that was the 22 test for them, we only had 50, like that was 50%, right? So they are growing compared to their own past performance, and that's why we see the growth scores as being decent there, even though it looks like they're kind of down from the previous year in the data. And then if we go up to the 6th grade, again, this is our really strong cohort here. So 69% meeting and exceeding, just only 1% not meeting. So this is, strong results from our 6th graders last year. And then the ELA state trend. So they did not give us updated information for this year, but they talked last year about the importance of the writing and what an impact the writing was having on school scores. So this is pretty much true across the Tri-Town, that our reading scores are stronger than our writing scores. And that's pretty much true in every district. And the writing can really sort of make or break how you're doing on the MCAS. So if you have scores that come in really low one year, the overall results tend to be low. When the performance goes up a little bit, you see your performance go up. The reading seems to be like a little less variable in terms of what we see. So we actually did see, when you look at the breakout scores, we're definitely growing in the writing area, but it's still lower compared to our reading, and an area for us to continue to focus on in order to sort of improve our overall performance as a district. So if we go to the curriculum trends in general, so we see in reading we are stronger. Generally our students are strong, identifying the main idea, being able to talk about characterization. Vocabulary tends to be pretty strong across the board, and the conventions and the writing production are linked. So there are a few questions here and there that are specifically like multiple choice questions about punctuation or something like that, but for the most part, the convention score comes from the essay. So the essay gets 2 scores, one for like its topic development and one for its conventions. And so the 6th grade conventions were really strong. And then the other conventions are a bit of a mixed bag, and the writing production part, or the idea development, that's lower than the conventions in terms of what we're seeing for the overall scores. And then if we jump over to math, this is that same chart basically that they provided at the state level for how we're doing. So again, modest gains across the state in 22, and still lower than we were pre-pandemic, but we're not as far back as we were in ELA. And that makes sense. When you first saw the results coming out of the pandemic, there was the math scores cratered, right? Because when you think about math, while it does build on itself, it's really tied to specific topics and whether or not you had time to cover them, as opposed to ELA, which are skills that grow continuously over time and go through developmental progressions. And so you're going to see, what we saw is that our ELA scores held pretty steady coming out of the pandemic, because once students are solid in those skills, they don't tend to lose them. But they grow more slowly as well. And so the math, if you get to the curriculum and you're able to cover it, you can see scores go up pretty fast, and the opposite is true. If you don't get to them, then you can see scores plummet pretty quickly as well. So that's kind of what happened with the state. Overall, the scores went way down in math. ELA held a little bit more steady, but math is bouncing back faster. So there's less differential from 2019 than there is from the ELA differential. Their ELA is recovering more slowly across the entire state. So if we look at how we're doing in math, you can see like 3rd grade over the last 3 years, so we're definitely seeing very major gains, right? So we were seeing as low as like 35% meeting and exceeding in 21. We're up to 49% now. We've gone from 20% not meeting down to 6% not meeting. So this is, again, that quicker recovery is happening in math as we're kind of seeing how our students are doing. Then we're looking at the 4th grade, so not too different from the previous year's scores, but again, not meeting cut in half, literally. So just nice to see those trends in students, more students moving into that meeting category. We go to 5th grade. We're seeing kind of, again, lower from last year, but when you go back to their 4th grade, what those students did in 4th grade, they're higher compared to their own past performance. So that 5th grade group, when we're talking about the 6th grade being a really high cohort, that 5th grade group has been a little bit of a lower cohort, but they're growing compared to their own past performance. So we're seeing that they are making gains. They're just not at the level of some of the other cohorts when you compare from year to year. And that 5th grade was very close to the state average. That's kind of unusual for us to be so close to the state average, frankly. There's usually more of a differential there. So that's something that we're going to need to continue to work with those students that are current 6th graders in supporting them and developing their math skills. And then that 6th grade math, the meeting looks like, the green looks just about the same, but look what happened with the exceeding. We went from 10% in 21 to 22% exceeding in this year, and that particular group, although they were strong to begin with, they had high growth as well. They were the one with the 61 high growth. So you're seeing those gains, not one student not meeting in 6th grade.
That was true for them when they were 5th graders too.
Yep, exactly, but they didn't have as high of they only had 10% exceeding, and that's
Right.
jumped to 22%. So that's why we're seeing such growth in that group, is that, yes, we didn't have anyone not meeting before, but we were seeing kids kind of move up and achieve at higher levels and at a higher rate of growth than their peers across the state who scored similarly. And then when we look at the Middleton math trends, so these look a little bit the same from year to year, and what we find is, year after year is the stuff that's in the areas for growth. Those tend to be the concepts that come at the very end of the year in terms of the curriculum. Often you just run out of road a little bit, particularly as we're coming out of the pandemic and we're needing to spend more time on concepts to solidify student skills. You kind of run into a time crunch towards the end of the year. Plus, there's a whole extra month of school after the test, right, where we're still teaching, but it doesn't show up on the test. So it's sort of a perennial problem about how do we think about helping students, can we weave some of that in a little bit earlier in the year through other disciplines to help them out a little bit, but we're always going to have that problem, that there's always going to be something that comes after the test, and those scores tend to be a little bit lower on the test. This year, we did see a couple of things pop up that's not typical. So place value is typically strong across the board, but for that fifth grade group, it was an area of weakness. And also the multiplying and dividing fractions was as well. And those are concepts that, in earlier grades, like those would have been solidified, but this group has been growing, but not quite as solidly. So we're still needing to work with them on those skills. Something that's very interesting about the data that will become relevant when we start talking about the science is that under an area for growth, under measurement and data, is representing and interpreting data. So it's not a really big set of questions on the MCAS, but it came up low across all three towns, which I've never seen before. I thought that was strange. And it's really about being able to read graphs and charts. How do you interpret like a table and add meaning to it? And that is like the entire science test. So when we get to the science, I think the fact that we're seeing an underlying weakness in there across the tri-town is playing out a little bit in our science scores. So, and just to talk about the Middleton math, so that grade 6, this was also true last year, that they're pretty strong across the board, but this was enormously strong. So most of these areas, they were 20 percentage points above the state, like in each of those areas. So it was very, very significant. The statistical variability is that topic that comes at the end of the year. It gets crunched every single time. And it's not weak, but it's comparatively weak compared to the others, right? But still, if we had to say something about 6th grade that they could improve in, that would be it. But I think that's really something that they just didn't have as much time for, that came after the test. But everything else, they were rock stars. Like, they were so far above the state average in all of those other categories. It was very impressive to see what happened with that 6th grade math. And then the science, this is true across the tri-town. We saw a dip in science. So that was really perplexing because historically we've done pretty well, and we weathered the pandemic. So it seems strange that this was the year that we saw that drop. And the state did go down a little bit, but not sort of as dramatically as we went down in the tri-town. So we've been sort of puzzling over that a little bit, like why did that happen? So I do think that underlying weakness in representing and interpreting data has something to do with it, because that science and engineering test, technology engineering test, used to be very factual. So they'd say, like, how many cells are in this? And you'd have to like just pick a multiple choice question. It wasn't really application. The whole test has moved toward kids applying their science knowledge to something that they have to interpret. So it will give them a table, or it will give them a diagram, and they have to be able to interpret that and then applying their science knowledge to it. So it may not be actually their lack of science knowledge that's the issue here. It might be a weakness in their ability to read those graphs and charts. So that's something that I think we need to work on explicitly. There are opportunities across the curriculum that we could weave more of that in and just strengthen that area, and I think it may make a difference as we kind of move forward with that science. I think a couple of other things to note about the science that it's important to know about this is that it's really best learned hands-on. So this is a 3-year test. It's based on standards that are covered in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. Every other test in MCAS is just 1 year's worth of curriculum. This is 3 years worth of curriculum. So these kids were in 3rd grade in that really weird year when we were 6 feet distanced. You can't really do good science, hands-on science learning under those conditions, right? So that was less than optimal learning from a standpoint in 3rd grade. And then when you look at their 4th grade year, which we'll come to the attendance in a moment, we had massive attendance issues when these kids were in 4th grade across the board. It's not much better. It's better, but it's not much better. Unlike the other disciplines where they tend to recur and spiral, so if you're working on reading, you're kind of always working on reading and you're moving along a continuum, you keep getting practice with those same concepts. Math spirals a little less, but it definitely does spiral and build upon itself. The way that the science works in the science framework is that K-2 covers basically the standards, and then 3-5 repeats them in a deeper way, and then 6-8 repeats them in a different way. So they do get repeated throughout kids' educational experience, but not in that 3-year period. So that 3rd grade concept is just taught in 3rd grade, and if you missed it, you missed it. And then 2 years later, you're being expected to take a test on it. So I do think that part of what we're seeing is just the cumulative effect of interruptions in students' learning that kind of caught up to us and these science scores in ways that we had, early on it was looking great. We're like, we're not worried about science. Let's talk about math and ELA and the recovery there. And now we're starting to see this show up in science. So it's something that we'll need to pay attention to going forward. And then that impact, so last year, the state, again, did not give us updated information, but they put out, data last year because there was a lot of absenteeism across the state, and a lot of it due to illness and COVID, restrictions where you had to be out 5 or 10 days. That was mandated, right? So that adds up very quickly in terms of the absences. But just the impact of how much absence kids had from school and what that overall impact was on their achievement was significant. And they put out these graphs and charts to talk about that. And then if you look on the next slide, this is Middleton's attendance. So in 2019, before the pandemic, we had, a 95.8 attendance rate. That's hard to wrap your mind around what that means exactly, but you start to look at the average number of absences was 7.4, and we had, 28.6% of kids absent 10 days or more. So it could have been 20 days, but it was at least 10 days or more. That percentage of students was out. And 10 days is 2 weeks of school. That's a lot of curriculum that they're missing. We had only 5% chronically absent, meaning that they were missing 18 or more days, roughly a month of school, essentially. When you look at what happened in 22, the average number of absences went up to 12. We had almost 60% of our students out at least 2 weeks. So 3 out of 5 students missed at least 2 weeks of instruction, and we had 1 out of 5 students missed at least a month of instruction. So really the impact of that is enormous in terms of curriculum coverage and our ability to work with students. When we look at this past year's attendance, it's better. We've dropped from 12 to 9.7 absences, but we're still at 42.4% of students were out at least 2 weeks from school, and that almost 12% were chronically absent. It's still, that chronically absent is still double what it was pre-pandemic. So when we try to think about our performance and how we might compare to our own past performance in 2019, we really have to think of time on learning in terms of are they in the seats? Because we can't teach them if they're not here. Right? And hopefully this will be a year where we have less illness. There are still some COVID restrictions in place in terms of number of days, but that has been scaled back in terms of how much you have to be out. And, hopefully last year when the masks finally came off, we know that all the illnesses came roaring back. It wasn't just COVID. So last year was just a really difficult year for illness. Let's hope, fingers crossed, that this year is less so, and that won't be a factor. But the degree to which families can get kids to school and not have them miss, it's really critical to our ability to function and to be able to support students as well as we can. So I just think that that's just really striking data. And when you think about how much kids missed and we're trying to teach them science concepts, it starts to make sense why they probably missed some of the things that were on that test because they just weren't here. And then the thing that just came back, so Massachusetts had an accountability system that had launched pre-pandemic. So it's the same accountability system that had been in place, but they haven't been able to execute that accountability system until now because it requires 2 consecutive years of complete data. And this is the first time since 2019 that we've had 2 consecutive years of complete data. So I'm just going to walk you through, because it's fairly complex, all the different facets of the accountability system, and then we'll take a look at the accountability data. So there are 2 different ways in which we're measured. One is a normative component, meaning that we're compared to other districts that serve similar grade levels, or the same grade level spans, basically, and how we're doing with our accountability compared to those other districts that serve those similar districts. And we're given a percentile that indicates that. And then there's criterion referenced components. So these are specific targets that are set for us based on our own past performance. And they're set for every grade level. They're set for each discipline. So there's different targets for ELA and math. They're set for subgroups of students as well. They're set for the lowest performing students in the school. So there's tons of different criteria that are being used, and all of these targets get added up to produce an overall percentage of how we're doing on meeting our targets. And then that is what determines our overall status in terms of accountability. So they're measuring the performance of groups, schools, and districts on very specific indicators. So we're being measured on achievement, which is our overall performance, like the meeting and exceeding on MCAS, the student growth, which we've talked about, high school completion, which is not relevant to us. It would be English learner proficiency if we had a big enough cohort in order for that data to be recorded, but we do not. So that's not a factor in here in Middleton. And then the additional factors include chronic absenteeism. And then there's a range of where you fall. So there's schools of recognition for schools that were really off the charts for one area or another. And then you have a whole bunch of categories that are not requiring assistance or intervention. So you have fully meeting, substantial progress towards fully meeting or exceeding your targets, substantial progress towards those targets, moderate progress, or limited or no progress towards those targets. Those are all in categories where the state would not be intervening And then there are two categories at the bottom where this state would be intervening if the performance was so low that they felt that the state needed to have a more direct hand in guiding the school district. So that's kind of where you are, and the percentage you get depends on that, all of those targets together added up and to produce that percentage that then gets kind of weighted. So the weighting of the indicators, so because we don't have the L component, the English learner component, because we don't have a big enough component, a big enough cohort for that, it is based on our achievement in our ELA, math, and science average composite scale scores. So that's weighted at 67.5%. The student growth for both ELA and math is 22.5, and the chronic absenteeism is 8%. So all of those kind of are part of the math that comes up with it. The normative component, we have accountability percentiles from 1 to 99 compared to other, non-high schools, because we don't have the high school component here. And they weight the averages. So the 23 data counts for 60%, and the 22 data counts for 40%. And then when we go on to the criterion reference components. So what was a little bit different this year is that typically they just set a target. But what the state realized is that some schools, or even in just some areas, like some subgroups, et cetera, perhaps were not back to their pre-pandemic performance. So normally you would set your accountability like going forward from where you are, but because a lot of districts had measures that they still weren't back to where they had been pre-pandemic, they put them on what's called a recovery path, as opposed to a path forward, which is you either had already gone back to your 2019 scores, or the goal that they would have set for you would have been less rigorous than the goal they set for you in 2019. And in either of those cases, you get put on the path forward. And these apply to like the different subjects, the different grades, the different subgroups. So we have a mixed bag. All three towns in the Tri-Town do. Mostly recovery, but some path forward results as well that are going into setting these targets. If you want to go back for 1 second. So I'm sorry, I thought I missed something there, but I guess I didn't. Yes, so that's basically how they're setting those targets. And then when you look at the next scale there are points assigned to this. So you're given a target. If you declined in your performance, then you get 0 points. If you had no change from past performance, it's a 1. If you improved, but you did not improve enough to meet the target, it's a 2. If you met the target, it's a 3. If you exceeded the target, it's a 4. And you'll look at the percentages that are assigned to that. So you get 100% if you're exceeding a target, but only 0% if you decline. If you declined like 1 point, you declined and you get 0. So when you think about like how quickly 0 average in to pull 100% down, think of like a kid getting a 50 on a test versus 100, now you're down to a C in a hurry, right? That's kind of what happens with these scores as well, because any sort of decline, even if your overall performance was still decent, but you decline just a little bit, you're going to get hit with that 0, and you're going to get a 0% weighted into your accountability. So it's just something to keep in mind about how rapidly these accountability results can change due to that particular scale. And then their other category here is that what they end up calculating is the lowest performing student group. So they take, based on the past MCAS, looking at both the math and the ELA scale scores, they figure out which students had which were the students that were like the lowest 25% of our performance, and they track them separately from the students as a whole, because they want to see that we're really reaching all of our learners and that we're helping the kids who most need our help to grow in meaningful ways. And so they do have some restrictions to who counts as part of this number. So they have to be enrolled and tested in our current district for at least 2 years. And that just makes sense because they have to have been here long enough for us to have had an impact. So if they moved in like the day before the test, their results really have nothing to do with us. And so they're not holding us accountable for students that we didn't have a meaningful period of time to work with. They're not first or second year English learners because, again, those students would not be able to access the test, so that wouldn't be particularly fair. And they weren't assessed on an MCAS alt. So students who have significant disabilities would be given a different version of MCAS, and that's not also factored into the overall ratings. So based on these eligible students, it's that lowest 25% of students that are in that other category. So then all of this brings us to big screen, which is really hard to see. It's a lot of data all in one place. So our overall accountability percentile is an 81, which means we are performing, and Fuller Meadow doesn't have that rating because they don't have MCAS, right? So it's just Town Manning that has this rating. But that means that we're doing better than 81% of other districts in the state that are, or other schools in the state who serve similar grade. That's what that number means. Overall, when you calculate all the different groups and factors, we were meeting 63% of the targets that we're supposed to, which means we're categorized as substantial progress toward the targets. So that is not requiring any intervention from the state. It's a good overall rating. So, much to be proud of there. And then when you break it down, you can see that they have the achievement is in blue, the growth is in green, the high school completion, which is irrelevant to us, and English learner is separate. And then that gray part at the bottom is the chronic absenteeism. And you can see the scores that they've given us. So to the left are all of our students, and to the right are the lowest 25% on the past MCAS, and how you're seeing that. So for our overall performance, and this is considering all of the grade levels and all of the groups, we had a 3 out of 4, meaning we met our targets. For ELA, we grew in math, but not to the degree that we met the target, which is why we got a 2. And we declined in science, which is why we got the 0 there. When we look over in the lowest performing, we had a 2, meaning the lowest performing students grew in ELA, but not to the target, but they exceeded the target in math. When you go down below for the growth, we had 3 out of 4 in all of those areas for the growth, not only for all students, but also for the lowest performing. We met the growth targets across the board for ELA and math. And then chronic absenteeism, while it's still clearly a pretty major issue for us, we met our target because we did go down a lot, compared to the previous year in terms of how many kids were absent. So we did get the 4s across the board, and that's all of what added up. So how the lowest performing group is doing and how all students are doing kind of get averaged to get us to that 63%, which then gets mapped onto that scale of where you fall, which brings us to that substantial progress towards targets. And then just thinking about next steps. So Matt and I will be back next month. You know that we have been working, kind of looking at the achievement of our special ed students, and so continuing to work on strategies to close those achievement gaps. Writing, while we actually have seen some nice gains here in Middleton in terms of the writing, it's still not as strong as our reading. And we did provide some initial professional development over the summer that teachers took advantage of. And we're going to continue to support writing professional development because that will have an overall benefit to our performance as a district. The math pacing, it's hard to figure that one out. It's a perennial problem, but the further into the curriculum that we can get, the better. And so just trying to think about how we can weave in some of those experiences earlier. And then that issue of focusing on representing and interpreting data that I think had an impact on our math scores, but also our science scores. How can we find some explicit opportunities to have kids practice those skills? And then just continuing to monitor that attendance, because it's still huge. 40% of kids last year, that's a lot, missing at least 2 weeks of instruction. So anything that we can do to get more kids in seats, I think we'll see our achievement grow as a district. And then that's it. So any questions?
I did have a question about the accountability percentile. So the score of 81 versus the criterion reference target percentage, 63%. Which of those scores, I guess, carries the most weight, or are they kind of irrelevant to each other?
I think in terms of determining our overall accountability rating, it's the criterion reference. The normative component is just to give you a sense of where we fall compared to other districts. So, we're better than 80% of other districts who serve the same grades. So that is helpful to know, that we're in the upper end of how schools are doing across Massachusetts. But in terms of what we get for our accountability, it really is it's the targets and how well we're meeting those. So it's that 63% that determined our overall rating for accountability.
What was that last year? Do you remember?
We haven't had one since 2019.
Oh, right.
Because they haven't been able to do this formula until this year.
Or was it in 2019? Just out of curiosity.
Don't know off the top of my head. Do you know, Jack? I can look it up, but I don't know off the top of my head.
And I know it's only 2 full months into the school year, but how is attendance looking as compared to last year? Is it about the same? I mean, it's probably too early to tell.
No, you can see trends.
Yeah.
I've actually got a note in my calendar that this time of year, 2 months in, start to look and see, are we heading towards any chronic absenteeism rates? So I'll have a better sense, I think, probably for the December meeting for sure, but
Okay.
I think you guys are reporting some similar trends.
I mean, we see some already that have hit 12.
Wow.
Yep. Yep.
That gets tricky. I mean, we're not even in the illness season yet, right?
Yeah.
And so the impact to have that many absences at this point in the year, and you know it's just going to get bigger as we get to flu season, et cetera. So it's concerning.
Okay.
I have a question. When you say interpreting data, and you can see that there's an issue with that, how quickly do you get that back into the curriculum? Everything's already planned out for the year, so how do you switch gears, and if you found an issue like that, how quickly does that come in, and how do you get that in?
Yeah, so it actually is not a really big part of the MCAS. I just thought it was, or the curriculum. It's just it was just striking because it's the very skill that we need on the science test. That's why it's only a few points on the math MCAS, but the skill itself is really significant for the science. So I think it gets practiced through science. Like when we're actually giving kids experiences, are they looking at graphs and charts and tables? That can also be done through social studies. It can be done through ELA if you're reading nonfiction articles. So I think it's a question of increasing our exposure across the curriculum. So it's not just in math, but there are opportunities for kids to interpret data across all disciplines. So just being mindful of when picking a nonfiction article, often it might have some tables and spending some time on that with kids to help them to better, have exposure to that and some experience with that. I think it's something that we can address pretty easily, actually. A lot of things are much harder to move, but that's one with some intentionality. I think that we can give kids experiences with that will improve that particular skill. And particularly as we're instructing in science, to give them opportunities to be thinking about science in terms of those types of data sets.
And that gets communicated down to the teachers that this is an area to concentrate on?
Yes, yep.
Great.
So, can you partially answer that question? One of the things I've met with the teachers to go through the data. And we look at it, particularly 4, 5, and 6, two ways. There's the autopsy data, right? The students that they have had and have already left, right? Those teachers, so 5th grade teachers looking at 5th grade data, those kids are already gone. There's not much they can do with that. So we look at that data, but then we're also looking at the data of the students that are currently sitting in front of them. So 5th grade teachers get all of the 4th grade data, and they get it by student, by question, right, and by standard, and be able to look at where those individual student weaknesses are as well, so they can, so again, 3rd grade teachers, hard, they're not coming in with any data, but when 4th grade teachers are looking at the 3rd grade students, so they know where the starting point is with some of those students. Could I pontificate a little bit more on some of this? So one of the things I think about with the MCAS, those first parts that, Scott, if you could scroll all the way back to the beginning almost. When I give this data to the teachers, that one. This is probably the least useful in terms of actionable data, right, for us to use in the school, but also the most important in terms of our accountability and everything else, right? Because when you're looking at this, that's 3 different sets of kids in that data, right? So that's not the same group of kids that were in 3rd grade in 2021, 4th grade in 2022, 5th grade in 2023. That's 3 different years, so it's comparing apples and oranges oftentimes, right? But we're judged on how we did improving the 3rd grade scores, even though it's a completely different set of 3rd graders. The more valuable way I look at that is 2022 in 3rd grade, what does it look like 2023 in 4th grade? And what do those numbers look like? That's the real growth to me that you see. That's the more important piece of it. The other thing I think it's important to remember is this data, it's one data point, right? It also is data that represents 4 days out of the student's year, right? 5th grade, 6 days, because 2 days of science as well, right? So it's not always, I like to think of it, it's the most efficient way for the state to gather data on student learning, but it's not the most effective way, right? Because I always think of, there's a great cartoon, and I'll do it in Injustice. I wish I'd put it up, like the flash it, love to be able to flash it up there, but it's a set of animals, a monkey, an elephant, a fish in a bowl, a dog, and they're standing in front of a guy sitting at a desk, and he says, in order for this to be a fair assessment, we're all gonna take the same tests. Please climb that tree behind you, right? And so you have that, and I always think of the kids that are a fish being asked to climb a tree to prove how much they've learned, right? That's not the best way to assess what they can do, but it's the most efficient way for the state to gather data across thousands and thousands of kids. Again, it's also a day, and what happened that morning, right? Are you not feeling well? Did something happen at home in the morning, something happened at night the day before, and the concentration is not necessarily there. So I think it's important data, but I also think it's important to keep it in perspective. And I would say this, if we were in the 100th percentile, right? And I'd say the same thing if we were in the 25th percentile. It's one data point, it's an important one, but it's one, right? So we need to look at taking everything. So when we look at, or did they not do well on, what was the one that you asked about, the interpreting data, right? Did they not do well on interpreting data because they don't understand that content? Or did they not understand the one or two questions that were relating to interpreting data on that test, if that makes sense, right? And sometimes, so we have to look at what was the question asking. Was it the language in it? Was it anything else, right? It could be that we didn't do a great job of teaching that content, but I think there's more to it than just looking at it and saying, we don't do well on that because it's there. Now, we also have to look at year across year, and if we're looking at 5 years of that score being lower, then we need to take a look at our instruction. But we also don't want to make unnecessary adjustments if it's something else beyond the instruction. Does that make sense there?
Excellent.
But they all do have that. The teachers have the data of the students that are currently sitting in their class, as well as the last year's data. But I tell them I want them to spend a very small amount of time on their previous students. Everybody wants to see how they did, but that we can't do anything about that. You, the teacher, can't do anything about that right now. What you can do is with the data of the students that are sitting in front of you. And so we spend way more time looking at that data than we do what they did before. I think that's a bigger, us looking at some of that historical trends. Are we seeing issues in the instruction overall at the grade level? Is it in one classroom? Is it in all of the classrooms? I think those are all the things that we need to take a look at as well.
Congratulations. It seems like you guys are doing.
I'm pleased, and again, there's obviously there's a lot of work to do, but I think, and Scott, if you could go to that third grade ELA, I just want to point that one out right there. That 63%, I think means a lot to. This was the group I think we were most worried about, particularly when it came to reading. This is the group that missed, or not missed, but was not in the building for March On in kindergarten. First grade was a really weird year for them as well, and that's all those foundational skills for the reading. And to be at 63% meeting or exceeding, I think, is a testament to not only the third grade teachers who did a great job, but also the teachers here at Fuller Meadow in getting those kids those foundational skills to get to that point. That was not, I don't think, our expectations when we thought about this third group. This, to me, was the most, coming out of COVID, that cohort was the most concerning, just based on what they experienced and when they experienced it. So it's promising data. I don't think we're not done, but it's promising data, I think, to be where they are right now.
Yeah, really good job. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
a
really
great job.
remarkable.
I think it's great to see the numbers with the lowest performing students to all students, because it's like no kids really left behind, right? It's like both groups excelled pretty much the same.
Yeah, and I think if you look at those graphs, and if you have to bounce, it's hard because you then have to bounce back and forth between pieces of paper and everything else to really keep track of it, but I think that was the trend everywhere. We increased the meeting at exceeding, but we also significantly decreased the not meeting as well.
And for that data point you asked, the accountability percentile in 2019 was 83, so it's
Sorry, I was-
81, so
yeah.
it's very close
I was
to where we
working
were
on that.
pre-pandemic.
Okay,
We were at 64% meeting target, so we were
Okay, so
63 this
similar.
year. It was
Okay.
64
So
in
same.
2009.
yeah,
Very similar.
yep.
Can I ask, so looking at the grade 5, which is this current grade 5, right?
Right, grade
Last
six.
year's grade 5.
Last year's.
This is all last spring, so these are current sixth graders.
Oh, yes, okay. That is correct. That is what I meant to be thinking. So if you look there so I'm looking at their ELA, then the not meeting expectations went from 6% to 0% to 13%. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I think that if you look at their, I don't have that up in front of me right now, let me look at the percentage. I do think we need to take a look at that, particularly that group, and continue to strengthen those skills. I mean, I think that there's
Scott, can you bounce back to fourth
one
grade?
slide. Yeah, they were at 15% the year
So
before,
that-
and
Oh,
now they're
okay,
down to
okay.
13.
Yeah.
And they went from, I think, something else there changed. So that was 8%. Can we jump up to the next slide for a second? No, the other way. To 10%. So they're up a little bit and exceeding, or down a little bit in the, so yes, compared to that's what basically what Jeff was talking about.
Yeah.
Compared to the previous cohort, and we know that that group was super high.
Yeah.
It looks like they really dropped off a cliff, but compared to their own past performance, what I would have liked to have seen is that to move a little bit more, but it is in the right direction, even though maybe we would have liked it to go even more in that direction. So,
And that's all part of the work you're doing. Well, some of it is part of the work
Yeah.
that you're doing.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then just thinking about, because the writing is heavily weighted in these scores in terms of how it impacts it. So we definitely did have PD over the summer that a lot of teachers took part in and are kind of working with some of those ideas now. It's not universal because it was a sort of a pilot over the summer. It wasn't all teachers, but we had a good turnout for that, knowing that that's something that we want to be working on. And so I agree with Jeff, like, this is how we're held accountable as a district. We have to pay attention to MCAS. And yeah, you look at these results, but what I find useful from a curriculum standpoint is we dig into the trends. Like, so I'm down, there's another report entirely that's about curriculum analysis where we can see certain concepts and standards and how they're doing from year to year. That's where I kind of saw that representing and interpreting data pop in a way that I hadn't seen before, that I don't know for sure that that's correlated to what's happening in science, but it sure seems like it might be, right, given that that's how that test works. So it's conclusions like that then give us some direction to be thinking about how can we address that particular point. So we know that writing has been lower than our reading all the way along, so that we know we should need to provide some professional development around that. When we were thinking about what we were doing, I mean, I agree with Jeff. I'm very proud of those third grade results. When we think of the interruption, like kindergarten and grade 1 is ground zero in terms of those foundational skills. And if they don't have them, they don't make that rapid progress later as readers, right? And so the fact that those, despite the interruptions of the pandemic, that those students have solidified their skills is cause for celebration, right? Absolutely. And I think that has everything to do with the work that we're doing as a district around trying to strengthen our literacy. So they're all tied together. I don't think, I completely agree with Jeff. We take MCAS as one data point. We have many other data points for us to consider, including our own screening, our unit tests, what teachers are seeing in the classroom. Those are all relevant data points. This is a test that allows us to see how we're doing against state standards, because it's the only standardized test that is aligned to our state standards, and it's the only one that allows us to see how we're doing compared to other districts. So it's useful in that way, but it's not the only game in town and not the only thing that we should be paying attention to guide our instruction.
One more comment on the writing piece. Well, again, there's a lot of work we need to do there, and I was just looking at, like, fourth grade, we got 35% of the possible points in the idea development. The state was at 30%. And that's consistent across all of the grade levels. We're in the 30s, but we're above the state. They're even lower in the 30s and sometimes in the 20s, so while I think there's a lot of work we need to do with our writing, I think the state also needs to look at how they're assessing it as well, because if only across the state 30% is the average, you probably got a problem with how you're assessing it. My opinion on that, but, I mean, that number should not be that low across the state. So I think they need to take a look at that piece of it, and we need to do a better job as well.
Is there any other way separate from MCAS? And I know you have your data meetings, but so you have all of the other information, which is a more accurate reflection of students day to day, that you're able to dig into that data, say it's their reading, their reading screenings or whatever, and look at it at this level.
Not at this level, only because there's no, I mean, there is some comparison with the national norms and everything else. And when you look at our reading scores with the national norms, I mean, we do shockingly well, I think, sometimes, where, a grade level of 100 and something kids, we might have 2 that are below where they should be, if that makes sense, on those. So thinking about that 35% is way too low. Sometimes those normative ones you can get a false positive on some of those. But we can look at certainly how, again, always to me more important, how are they growing? What did they do in September compared to what they're doing in January compared to what they're doing in June? And we do have those meetings, and the teachers do have that data. It doesn't go, like, with the MCAS data, I could literally, probably standing up, I could bury you in data just from how many, right? I mean, teachers got folders this thick with data, and that was a small portion of the paper that I could have gone through to put this together. So no, we don't have that kind of being able to analyze it forward and backwards. But again, data is what you can see, what you can hear, and what you can count, right? And that matters. And I don't think what teachers are seeing and hearing in their classroom should count for anything less than what we're able to count here, if that makes sense as well. And that's usable.
I think they serve different purposes, right? So if we're thinking about a unit test for Math and Focus, that's assessing the unit we've just taught.
Yeah.
This is, MCAS is assessing globally, all of the standards. Our universal screener is looking at more discrete skills, particularly in literacy. So like when you take that 3rd grade MCAS and ELA, it's a reading passage and you're answering multiple choice questions and you're writing about it. That's what's being assessed. When you're doing those other assessments, we're measuring how well can you decode? What is your phonemic awareness? Like what's your vocabulary? Like we're seeing all of the different components of reading broken down into kind of minutia that allows us to know where to target our instruction in ways that looking at a global score in MCAS is like, okay, that's the end result, but it's knowing how to intervene and where to intervene. Those other assessments are far more useful instructionally.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No? Thank you for all of this.
thank you
It's
for
a
the
lot of
presentation.
information.
No, thanks for driving.
No problem.
Okay. So the next Tri-Town Union meeting is scheduled for December 13th. It's usually on a Thursday. This year, it's usually, yeah, but we had to reschedule for some scheduling conflicts. So it'll be on December 13th, which is a Wednesday, and it's at the Cool School
Yep.
in Boxford.
7:15-ish. We'll notify that as we get closer to the date. Boxford had to move their meeting, so we always try to tie to them. 12:13, we'll do central office budget at that meeting. Any updates on work that's happening around food services, and then any follow-up from the last meeting as well.
All right, nothing in the correspondence folder. So then we just need to vote on accepting bills and payroll. So would anyone like to make a motion to accept the bills and payroll as presented?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor of accepting bills and payroll as presented, say aye. Aye. Any nays?
And just one quick other, If you get any questions on Friday, we have school Friday. It's a half day, half professional development day on Friday. I can't speak for other districts and how other districts put their calendars together. We follow the Secretary of State's guidance on holidays, and according to the Secretary of State's office, Saturday holidays are observed on a Saturday, and Sunday holidays are observed on a Monday. And so Veterans Day itself is on Saturday, so it's celebrated on Saturday per state law and calendar. And that's the calendar that we follow. Again, I can't speak to how other districts operate, but that's the way we have always functioned. Next year, Veterans Day will actually be on a Monday. It doesn't move to Sunday because it's a leap year in 24. So it'll actually be on a Monday, and then it'll be on a Tuesday, and then it'll be on a Wednesday, and it'll be on a Thursday. So, but if you get any questions, it's because we follow the guidelines from the Secretary of State, and Veterans Day actually falls on a Saturday this year.
Would anyone like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll second it.
All in favor of adjourning the meeting, say aye. Aye. Any nays?